Hi, everybody. Welcome back for our next session. Hey, and there's Jim West. Thanks so much for joining us. Please welcome Mr. Jim West. He has over 28 years of experience in the information technology field, 17 of which is focused on information security. He has worked in a variety of sectors, including commercial, space, and defense, and he holds multiple certifications. He's an award-winning author, and he's talking to us today about the real threat of quantum computing. Thank you so much, Jim, and take it away.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for attending the Global CISO Forum, and thank you for this opportunity to speak on a topic that I'm going to be sharing some information that might be some things that some people on this may know already about, and you may learn something new today. And hopefully, if anything, it will help you at least be aware of it so that you can prepare and plan for our inevitable future with quantum computing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go right into my slides. Are the slides showing up currently?
They are not. Doesn't look like you're sharing your screen.
Okay, one moment. Is it now showing?
It's not. Do you see on the control panel where it says sharing right at the top?
Okay, yep, there it is. It says paused.
So hit play.
It is not wanting to play. Do a stop, and then let me do a show. It just says paused. Maybe if I click on it. Is it showing now?
Yep, you're good to go.
Okay, I will try to go to the slideshow mode. It goes into paused when it's going to slideshow. Is that a very common thing?
Not that I'm aware of.
1 second. Then I'm going to just have to try to maximize this and work with it this way. Well, this is unfortunate, but we'll work with it. So the real threat of quantum computing. Let me get right into the details of this. So we're dealing with quantum physics. Quantum computing and quantum cryptography are at the forefront of the cybersecurity race to protect confidential assets. Currently, the QKD or quantum key distribution is available. We are seeing advancements in quantum computing pretty much on a week-by-week basis. I think quantum computing makes the news significantly every couple of weeks. There's been some recent breakthroughs with the size of quantum computers, with a particular company releasing some media in the past couple of weeks. So we're going to see more and more news of quantum computing as we move forward. But currently, a lot of the top research labs and entities are using quantum key distribution. RFC 2409 is the IKE standard that is using pre-shared keys, which falls under part of the program for commercial solutions for classified from the NSA, National Security Agency. So we'll be talking a little bit about that program later in this presentation. So we can't really escape the past. For most people that are aware of how cryptography works, you're taking plain text and encrypting it, creating ciphertext, and then you have another key to decrypt that ciphertext to convert it back to plain text. And that's the general foundation of how cryptography works in exchanging or protecting information. So when you have such a system by which the most widely used system is referred to as public key cryptography, it pretty much is our foundation for almost everything that we do, from email to messaging, secure messaging. Everything that we do is based upon public key cryptography. And so one of the threats that quantum computing introduces is that with these algorithms, because cryptography is usually based on a mathematical problem or algorithm, if it can be compromised, meaning if half the key space that's available per that algorithm can be, I guess, brute forced is the term, by a supercomputer or quantum supercomputer, that means if it can be done in a feasible amount of time, it renders that algorithm or that cryptography solution is not as secure as others. So with public key cryptography being the foundation of whether it's an architecture, platform, tools and systems that we use, everything is built on that foundation. So to kind of visualize that threat, if we can undermine the foundation of by which key cryptography is handled, then everything that's built upon that foundation can be compromised. So the first thing is obviously, what are the threats of quantum computing to national security? We had Mr. Krishna, a director of IBM Research, quoted to say that anyone that wants to make sure that their data is protected for longer than 10 years should move to alternate forms of encryption now. So some of the threats that quantum computing will pose to national security, it is a grave danger to national security systems, or NSS. It also poses threats against diplomatic issues, litigation, increased tensions amongst partners, and fodder to fuel terrorism. So I will first expand upon diplomatic issues. So what this means is that a lot of nation states, the ciphertext that's in the internet, that's in the ether, it's being collected. Data is being collected, it's being stored. So we have decades of ciphertext. Let's say a country has petabytes upon petabytes of data that's collected over decades, and they can't read it. But one day, let's say they achieve a quantum supercomputer that can then render that ciphertext, break the algorithm, and then read that ciphertext. What would that information, the classified information, potentially be damaging to national security? Would it cause geopolitical alliances and partnerships to erode, or would it cause more tension? So those are some great threats to think about, because things that happened a decade ago that can be read now easily by other countries, that may pose a threat to national security. Now, what are the threats to the commercial industry? Most people watching this presentation that does not work with national security systems, they work in the commercial sector. Well, what does this mean to me? So in 2018 October, there was a report done that elevated quantum computer threats to the top of this list of digital disruptions which CIOs may not be prepared. And so some of those threats are corporate espionage, disruption to digital transformation efforts, increased targeted attacks to intellectual properties. It could render your current safeguards ineffective. And by that statement, that foundation of cryptography, if it's compromised, everything built on it is compromised. And of course, increased costs to adopt countermeasures, because once everybody starts to have to knee-jerk to protect their networks and their systems from quantum supercomputer attacks, it may be an increased cost to do so. So trying to kind of plan for that inevitable future would be in the best interest of both government and commercial industry. So some of the algorithms that you can find available on the CNSA suite are listed here. These algorithms has been vetted and deemed between NIAP and the NSA to protect up to certain levels of classified information. So as you see in the far right, the parameters is that there are certain keys and bit string keys that could protect all the way up to top secret information. And that is as of today. The agency will refer to some of these algorithms as being quantum resistant is the term that they will use. They have not formally, to my knowledge, have published any algorithms that have been deemed quantum proof. So it's kind of, we don't know yet how some of these algorithms would hold up against a quantum supercomputer. So that is still to be determined. But there is a lot of funding being done to universities and other organizations to develop more algorithms that will be eventually deemed quantum proof. So the term quantum resistant. Unfortunately, the popular cryptographic algorithms that play a central role today in protecting proprietary information and data, including RSA, Diffie-Hellman, and the DSA, will not be secure from attacks by quantum computers. Nor will blockchain, since it depends on elliptical curve cryptography. Blockchain, as most people correlate it to, is it is the foundation of cryptocurrencies, like Bitcoin. So it has the same quantum vulnerability. There's a term, QDAY is a informal term that's been linked to the day that we have a quantum supercomputer that exists, and what potential it could have for wreaking damage on networks and whether financial systems and other markets. But again, there's a lot of conspiracy theories that I won't delve into around that. But the one that has been deemed quantum resistant is AES 256, Advanced Encryption Standard 256-bit. So a lot of questions I get asked is how strong some of these algorithms are. And so did some So the question was, how strong is AES 256? So a 256-bit private key will have that many possible combinations. So that's 78 digits of possible combinations. Currently, no supercomputer on the face of this earth can crack that in any reasonable time frame. People that track the top 500, or the top 50, which is the fastest supercomputers on the planet, the US and China are kind of in a supercomputer race. So at the time that I formulated this 10 to the 38th power, at the time the Tiani 2 was the fastest supercomputer, but I've updated the slides. I believe it's now number 4 on the list. But it would take 10 to the 38th power of the Tiani 2 supercomputers running for the entirety of the existence of everything to just get through half the key space of one AES 256 key. To put that in perspective, there's not enough materials on the planet of Earth to make that many supercomputers, one, and two, that's the entirety of all existence to break half the space. So that algorithm has been deemed quantum resistant. It has not been formally deemed quantum proof yet. So to kind of put that in perspective, if that's one of the fastest supercomputers on the planet, and there's no way to even make that many of those computers, how does quantum computing pose a threat? Well, the reason why is classic computers are built on a concept of ones and zeros. With quantum computing, you now have a third state, a state that is both on and off, a 1 and a 0 at the same time, if you will. And you have things such as entanglement and superposition that are involved into how supercomputers operate and how they affect the electrons that work. One of the simplest ways that I've explained how, like, for example, superposition works is that the lights are on and off at the same time. With a classical computer, the lights are either on or they're off. But with quantum computing, the lights are on and off at the same time. And so that's really hard to kind of wrap your head around, but that's where we get introduced to that extra state. And therefore those bits are quantum computing are referred to as qubits, that the amount of processing that can be theoretically done is tremendously more than what current supercomputers can do. So there is a program by the National Security Agency. They started it several years ago called Commercial Solutions for Classified. And this program, it is published publicly. There's documentation. There's a lot of layers to this program, which I'll briefly discuss what those are. But this is what I've been recommending to a lot of corporations and businesses for the past 3 years to at least approach some aspects of this program into their own security plans. So what they've done is they've created a process that enables commercial products to be in layered solutions to protect classified national security systems information. So just because this program was established for government and federal use does not mean that other countries, other organizations, and companies can leverage this program. So back to the program, at the core of this program is the rule of two. There's two completely independent layers of cryptography that are used to protect data. Think of it as in terms of, it's like instead of just having one VPN tunnel, it's like you have two VPN tunnels with two different cryptographic key libraries encapsulating both those tunnels. So if you have a compromise on the outside tunnel and you have systems that are monitoring the traffic in between that gray network, if you will, then you have some warning or a chance to head off a full compromise. Some of the assurances that are baked into this program is there's a lot of standard space. So you have some NIST standards and security controls that are built in this program. You have capability packages that have been tested against NIAP protection profiles. And you have a component selection process that the NSA oversees. And finally, you have these vetted trusted integrators that can help deploy these solutions to your networks. And this is a snapshot of how their overview of their program, and you can see there's different levels and factors that are brought in and entities. For example, you have your encryption protocols, your PKI infrastructure protocols. It feeds into the NIAP common criteria evaluation products. Then you have a FIPS validation process. You have a components list there in the middle that defines different components that can be used for these different packages. And then you have compliance and testing. So at the end of the day, there's a lot of things that are pulled into this program to give it its security. So if you would have said to someone 10 years ago, hey, one day we'll be able to have wireless networks for top secret and classified information, 10 years ago, people would have said, no way. But now with the advancement of our technologies and our commercial products being just as good or providing enough security that the NSA themselves has said, yes, you can now deploy commercial products to protect up to top secret information. And this program and how it functions is why it's able to do that. And so the rationale is, if it's good enough for federal government and for defense, this should also be good enough for corporations. Some of the other benefits of CSFC, it provides a lot of defense in depth. It actually incorporates 5 defense in depth frameworks of uniform protection, protected enclaves, information-centric, threat vector analysis, and role-based access control. All of those are baked into the CSFC program. It also uses all 9 security principles that the NSA uses as part of their security engineering process. Most people have heard of the CIA, the triad, the security triad, but there's actually 6 more security principles. So there's authenticity, non-repudiation, authorized use, possession, utility, and privacy. And all of these principles are baked in into the design and architecture of commercial solutions for classified. Another question I get asked a lot is, how much time do we got? And so from a 2018 report that investment firm did, the estimates that they did with a lot of different people in industry pegged us at less than 10 years, or I'm sorry, in this one they put greater than 10 years before we would have general purpose quantum computers. But since 2018, we've actually seen some small form factor quantum computers be developed. As I mentioned earlier in this talk, about 2 days ago, the company just made public that they have quantum computers that are fairly, they fit in the cabinet. So that's pretty good advancement. So I would recommend to people that we have approximately 5 to 8 years before we see general purpose quantum computers. And I would say a quantum supercomputer in less than 10 years. That's just my own perspective and opinion. So is future proofing possible? So this is where I would like to have some feedback and some questions from the audience, and I will try to move over to the chat window. So I'm looking at the chat window. I don't know if we have any questions so far or any thoughts, discussion on how is future proofing possible?
There are no questions so far. Everybody, you can click on the icon that looks like a question mark to ask a question.
So what I will do while we're waiting on a question is, if my screen's still being shared here, I'm going to back up to, there's a lot to read on this one. So I'll go ahead and read through the principles since if anyone's waiting to ask a question. But I like to talk about the principles because a lot of times people are only aware of a few of these and not all 9. But confidentiality is the protection against the risk of unauthorized disclosure. Integrity is the protection against unauthorized modification. Availability is the protection against the risk of denial of service. Authenticity is protection against the risk of not conforming to reality. Non-repudiation is the protection against risk of deniability. Authorized use is the protection against the risk of unauthorized use of cost incurring services. Possession is protection against the risk of loss or theft. Utility is the protection against the loss of the availability to use for the intended purpose. And privacy is the protection against the risk of disclosing personal information. A lot of times people get confused between the difference between confidentiality and privacy, and that one is confidentiality has to do with the business or the organization. Privacy is with the individual. So hence like PII, personally identifiable information, HIPAA, all these regulatory laws governing people's private personal information. So that's treated separately than a business or entity's confidentiality. So I'm looking at the chat still. I see no further questions. So I will go ahead and conclude. So organizations must plan today for an inevitable Q day. It will happen. We just don't know exactly when this Q day will happen, but it will. So my recommendation would be to start securing your communications now. Encryption is something that every organization should be deploying and utilizing to various degrees. We hear about ransomware attacks, we hear about malware attacks, we hear a lot how data, ultimately, if your data, you have to protect it. You have to protect the customer's data, you have to protect transmissions, everything you send out, email communications, everything should be encrypted and protected. So I would recommend to any business that was looking to modernize the networks or to purchase a network refresh, look at the NSA's approved products list, and maybe that will help you make your decision on what routers and switches to purchase if you're doing a network refresh. It would be better to be positioned to where if you had to switch over and use CSFC, it would be better to be using products that have been vetted by NIAP and NSA as being more secure than other products. And that might be a leg up that you could do as you're the next few years modernizing your networks. Another thing you should do is employing layered defenses such as CSFC in your security strategy. I would not advocate for any business to fully use a CSFC package 100% because it would just be very burdensome, cost a lot of money, and could potentially slow down your operations. But what I would recommend is looking at the CSSC program and seeing, hey, these are some good strategies or these are some good security measures that we should be doing, but we're not. Let's incorporate that into our security strategy. So it wouldn't hurt for your security teams to at least look at the program and maybe evaluate it for what facets or parts of that program we may want to incorporate into our current security posture. So it's definitely something to kind of look at it and say and compare it to where you're at today. And the closer you can get to
Hey,
that.
Jim.
Yes.
Sorry to interject. Did you see all of the questions you've been getting in the question box?
Oh,
Wanted to
I
make sure you didn't miss
minimized the
those.
box, but let me switch back. I am, okay, let me scroll up. I am not. I just say, did you see the
Okay, don't
questions?
check the chat. Yeah, don't check the chat. Go to the question box, not the chat box.
Questions box. There we go.
There.
Extent. Okay, so the first one looks like Donna. To what extent do you think blockchain can be used to mitigate the threat? So as far as, again, blockchain is still built upon algorithms that have not been formally deemed as quantum proof. So at the end of the day, you have to look at the very foundation of the encryption standard. What is the algorithm, and has the algorithm been deemed quantum proof is the key word. Now, there are other subsystems that will help, like detection systems and things to help mitigate external threats coming into the system itself. But the bottom line is the algorithm quantum proof? And so until we have an agency or an entity producing what has been deemed and accepted by industry as a quantum proof algorithm, I think we start there with the problem. So regardless, in general, blockchain, if it's using a standard encryption algorithm that has not been deemed quantum proof, then I don't think you can mitigate the threat with blockchain because blockchain is based upon an algorithm. Next question is, will there be required standards issued by government? So the government will always follow the direction of the National Security Agency's mission is to protect government networks and data and to fully vet out cryptographic standards. But then you have another entity called NIAP. You have different government entities that are part of the process of approving algorithms and encryption standards. At the end of the day, the government may not necessarily will publish what those standards are, but then it's up to each entity, organization, and corporation and business to make a decision of what they adopt themselves. So the government will publish what they're using and what they have to do for their networks, and it's up for corporations and their stakeholders to make the decisions that are best for their company. What materials are used in the computers? So there are certain computers that are having to be liquid cooled, such as the ones utilized by IBM and a couple other countries that have quantum supercomputers or quantum computers that they're working with. As far as quantum supercomputers, there's no telling how they will be developed or used. But so far, the majority of quantum computers in existence today are fairly large, except for the one that recently got published on the internet about a couple of days ago. Next question, Zachary, given where we are today and when we started computing, as we now in the early 70s, give your assessment of where we'll be in the next 20 years. So the next 20 years, I definitely see in 20 years that we will have quantum supercomputers, quantum computers. I think in 20 years, it's very feasible to say that with advancement of technology and costs going down, that it would be very plausible that in 20 years, I will be presenting at a conference on a quantum computing laptop or quantum CPU-based laptop. I think that's very plausible in 20 years. Next question. Most of the technologies out here that help seem to be focused on user credentials at the workstation level, but how can you protect network equipment, firewalls, etc.? At the end of the day, when you're talking particularly about perimeter defense or perimeter devices, there's very little you can do to protect them because you'd have to then put another firewall for your firewall. So at the end of the day, the thing is about getting securing your devices as best as possible from a configuration viewpoint, and then having the expert systems or the monitoring systems that you use tuned enough to where you can identify what is a legitimate attack and what is normal traffic. And then just again, fine tuning your expert systems as you move forward, I think is at the end of the day, the best help. And of course, if you have a solid encryption standard or encryption system on your network, you can actually hide your entire network from attack as well. So I don't want to mention any companies that have products like that because this is not supposed to be an endorsement of any kind. How long digital signatures will be secure? Again, digital signatures are also based on algorithms, and as long as those algorithms are deemed quantum proof, or for now there's some that are deemed quantum resistant, but as long as they're quantum proof, then they're good for protecting your digital signatures. What about following CMMC compared to NIST regarding combating threats? So CMMC, the cybersecurity maturity model, capability model, is a lot of defense contractors and organizations are having a tough time trying to get up to the standards set forth. But again, it goes back to the basis of if you're transferring risk, or if you have a network and you're secure here, but you're now putting an SLA or a contract or bringing a defense contractor, and then their networks have to meet the same security watermark that you have here. Otherwise, you have a weakness here that's going to be able to exploit your network. So the basis of why CMMC exists is a very reasonable expectation from government. But as far as compared to NIST, it's actually utilizing NIST security standards. So those go hand in hand. So there's not, one has a framework, or risk management framework and security controls and standards, and CMMC is incorporating that to measure your level of cybersecurity maturity, if you will. Next question, what types of encryption techniques are recommended for databases without impacting operation? So that's a question I'm not gonna be able to fully answer. Simply because with databases, you have a lot of transactions, you have a lot of things that are happening in the background. Currently, I know that the current most popular one is probably TLS is the most popular one for the back end. But again, as the algorithms that TLS is based on, there'll probably be a future version of TLS that will be quantum proof. And again, it's a race to get these new algorithms that again are deemed quantum proof, one created and found. And these mathematical problems aren't easy at all. So that's why a lot of money, I believe DOE, Department of Energy, is the biggest government funder for developing algorithms. So because obviously our nuclear program is wrapped up in there. And so the encryption standards that we use to protect our nuclear program is at the top level of threats for our government. So when it comes to databases and those encryption techniques, you'll probably definitely see that hopefully come within less than 5 years from now. We'll have what I would feel would be quantum proof algorithms. I think that's the last question on the list here.
Okay, if you're ready to wrap up, thank you so much for joining us, and I will see everybody in the next session.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for attending the Global CISO Forum, and it's been a pleasure to speak to you all today.